Welcome to the Less Doing podcast, where you will learn how to start living more by doing less.
Let me help you optimize, automate, and outsource your entire life so you can focus on doing the things you love.
Now here's your host, Ari Meisel.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Less Doing podcast. My name's Ari Meisel, and I'm your host, as usual. And today my guest is Dr. Doug Brackmann, who is the author of a book called Driven, and a psychologist and a meditation leader, and a very, very interesting guy. And I met him in person for the first time a couple weeks ago at the Black Belt coaching event run by Taki Moore. And I'd read his book, and I'm really excited to talk about a whole bunch of things psychology related, and we're going to talk about shooting and all sorts of cool stuff. So, Doug, thank you so much for making the time to talk to me.
Hey, thank you, Ari. It's a pleasure to meet you a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, this is, in fact, I have to admit, I just discovered your podcast after meeting you, and I've been addicted. We are kindred spirits, it seems.
I think so, again, thank you. So, but I want to get into your background, but I actually want to go into a question right off the top. So you are a psychologist. You've done work in a lot of different areas, but one of the ones that stands out to me is your work in self-sabotage.
That was my dissertation topic, actually. Self-sabotage, or self-fulfilling prophecy, as it's called.
Yeah, and so I want to. I want to talk about your background as we would normally do in any interview, but I really want to get to this right away. So it's become particularly fascinating to me over the last few months, not only on a business level, but in personal stuff. And I've seen friends and colleagues do things that to me seemed like self-sabotage. And it's people where things are going well, like they don't need to, there's no reason to be doing this, right? So like why does this happen?
So I did my dissertation really started in the mid 90s, and it's an amazing time to be a psychologist just because of this functional MRI, and we can now actually see what's going on. But very simply, human beings are not wired for safety. We're wired for the familiar. And so, the part of the brain and body that actually is drawn into a familiar environment is directly opposed to the new brain, or the neocortex. So there's really two of us in there, and one of which is genetically wired for what we were born into, and so I come from a whole bunch of different fields of study, and cultural anthropology is one of them. And human beings, 120,000 years of development, we basically created a world with our neocortex that our genetics just don't fit into. So, the part of us, the self, that wants the familiar versus the new brain that can imagine all kinds of amazing worlds, are at odds. And so there's always part of us that is seeking the familiar. And that's the classic example is that's why January is just horrible at the gym, because everybody's, their new brain or their monkey mind is just, convinced them that this time it's going to be different. And then come February, March, April, May, the body basically, or the reptilian brain says, I've had enough. And so you just start to feel resistance to going to the gym. And then if you have the monkey mind up there rationalizing or justifying, or, and there's always another big gorilla with a big stick trying to beat you to go. But it's these two different senses of self that are opposed to each other. And most psychologists hate to admit it, but it's really the reptilian brain that is in charge of our life. And so that ability to overcome it or push through it, and all my work with the Navy SEALs and these guys that are able to push through a whole bunch of stuff they don't want to do, is not necessarily a good thing. And so it creates a, eventual, body that will not be able to handle. That's why these guys completely get addicted to going into incredibly intense, dangerous worlds, because it's what's familiar to them. And so when they come back, the adjustment period is what we call post-traumatic stress. And so there's really two different people in here that are controlling us. And the one that is unconscious or subconscious or preconscious, whatever you want to call it, it's the one that's really in charge.
Well, is there a way for people to decide what's going to be familiar to them?
And so that the decision process of
or habituate, I guess,
Well, I say it all the time, is that human beings are in a constant state of change, and we're always adapting, and we're in a constant state of change, working our ass off at staying the same. And so all the work I do in efficiency and getting people to not sabotage is just that. And I hate the buzzword mindfulness, but it's really bodyfulness, to feel that impulsive, reptilian machine down below our nose, constantly trying to make these unconscious or, decisions for us. And then you have another part of the brain that seems so conscious, which one is actually deciding to do it. So it's a very interesting, it gets really deep really quick. So, if you ask, who's making the decision to go to the gym, it's, there's part of you that's always going to resist, and there's another part of you that's trying to cheerlead you on. And that's the core of that book I wrote, is really trying to get people to get into this curious mindset about, who's really in charge of my life.
So how do you start that process? And then also, of course, like as you said with Navy SEALs, they need to be able to do that and push through things that they don't want to do. So where's the balance? How does a normal person sort of train that, or harness it, I guess?
So yeah, it very simply, and I laid it out in the book, is it's I use the very old metaphor that the Buddha came up with, 2,500, 2,600 years ago, that, human beings are very much like an Indian elephant, kind of lumbering along with a whole bunch of monkeys up on top of this elephant with these little elephant hooks with the sticks, trying to beat the elephant into submission to go do this and don't do that. And, and the Buddha observed very quickly that, who's really in charge of us. And, when it comes to most addictions, sex and, food, and actually Indian elephants are a great example of that. If you ever give an Indian elephant, sugar cane, sometimes you actually have to put them down to keep them from charging, into sugarcane fields. No matter who's on top of it, no matter how big your stick is, you just can't stop them. And so it's a very interesting kind of a philosophy, that starts out of that. But the classic Buddha question is, which one are you? Are you the monkeys up on top of this elephant, or are you the elephant itself? And it's a old Zen question, are you the monkeys or the elephant?
Does it matter?
It's a trick question, because the answer is obviously both,
right?
But neither at the same time. And raw consciousness, this ability to observe the impulsive elephant, feeling stuck to the couch at 5:30 in the morning, when you're monkey mind and the gorillas in your head are trying to beat the elephant into submission to go. That ability to listen and see both at the same time is this third element, of raw consciousness. And that raw consciousness then is able to actually not rationalize not going, nor convince yourself to go. And, the massive takeaway from meditation, and it is that in the present moment, there is no resistance. There is no resistance in the elephant. And so your efficiency model is just brilliant in that, as you start to feel the resistance to these things, if you integrate a mindfulness practice or a meditation practice, the resistance will actually melt away. And, I don't want to go and feel what it's like to, walk through the door of the gym at 5:30 in the morning. No matter how big the elephant, resistance is, it's still resisting what is not happening right now. And so as you elicit that skill or expand your consciousness, you are actually building a really interesting part of the brain. that allows for us to actually do anything we want to do. And it's a really powerful, simple tool, but it's a it's a lifelong mastery practice, very quick.
Well, and so from your background in psychology, how did you get into meditation?
Like everyone else, I was absolutely miserable, and it kind of ran out of every option. Interesting story, I didn't start out, well, kind of two major transitions in my life. First of which, when I was 18, 19, I found myself as a high school dropout living in a car, and completely blew up my life, or so it seemed. But this, bless her heart, woman came and banged on the back window of this car I was sleeping in and says, screaming at me, "You can't sleep here." But in that moment, I had that conscious awakening, realizing that I wasn't, the person that she actually saw, and I started to question, who was I? And that was kind of the start of it. And then 15, 18 years later, I found myself at 31 years old going through a divorce, basically coming through a dissertation, basically abandoned my wife for 2 years, and at the same time broke my leg. And so I was a complete exercise addict. The only thing I was doing I was doing Ironmans at the time, triathlon, and was teaching Psych 101 or Psych 100 or whatever it was in a graduate level. And I was TAing for my dissertation chair, and he looked at me and just said, "Dude, you are going to kill yourself if you don't figure something out." And the good kind of addictive personality that I just went and blindly signed up for a 10-day meditation retreat. Never had meditated in my life before, and walked into this SN Goenka, 10-day, let's figure this out. And I was hooked. And that was, that was 15, 18 years ago now. And so I was just miserable at my, wit's end, and had to figure something out. And it clicked. And since then, it's just been an amazing time to be a psychologist, because the wave of mindfulness study and everything that's actually happening in the brain when we meditate has been just my absolute passion.
And then how did you start working with Navy SEALs and people of that ilk?
So, when I first started in the field of psychology, I was basically a recovering drug addict, and started working this was 32 years ago, working in rehabs. And in 1991, amazing article came out in Time magazine. We found the alcoholism gene, and they just really started getting into the human genome, and they cracked the dopamine receptor sites that, associated strongly, highly correlated with alcoholism. 2, 3, 4 years later, they start really looking into this thing, and it's like, well, it's not just alcoholism; it's eating disorders, gambling addictions, it's any type A personality and stress, and since that time, I've just been on the forefront of really understanding the genetic underpinnings of what makes the about 10% of the population significantly different than the rest. And Navy SEALs, entrepreneurs, professional athletes is kind of where I landed in just working with this type of personality. In the last 10, 15 years, it's almost exclusively with this type of personality. So wound up working with one of my good buddies who was a Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL, and we'd shot a bunch together and did martial arts together for a long time, and pitched this idea to him. Hey, help me write this book and really look at this personality type from a cool guy perspective. And, I've been in the mindfulness world for 15 years, and the hippy dippy, huggy stuff is less palatable to me. And so I really wanted to pair up with somebody who was going to differentiate from that. And I got knee deep in working with the Navy SEALs and getting these guys to meditate. And they were like, whoa, wait a minute. This is not what I thought meditation was. And their efficiency and their shooting and everything else starts to go through the roof. And once you're in that crowd, it seems that, once they find something that works, they'll jump all over it. So they kind of adopted me into their world for a while. I've kind of slid out of it now that I'm into more entrepreneurs, but It's really that personality type A driven nutcases that we all are.
Well, and so you said there's about 10% of the population, and those are the people who you're saying are exceedingly driven or something?
So what the book is about, what I wrote this book about, was building up the research of this guy named Tom Hartman, who's a radio talk show guy now on Russia television, believe it or not. But he had an ADD, ADHD kid that was being severely pathologized by the school system, and making him feel like he's broken, and wanted to give him meds, and wanted to be just wrap him up into the pathology world. And he started to get into the genetics and looking at the underpinnings of this. This was mid 90s, before all the research really came out. And he theorized that, about 90% of the population adapted over the last 4,000 years to the agricultural world. And so his theory, and my book builds on his stuff, really getting into the science behind it. But about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, the world took a drastic turn to incredible safety compared to what it normally is. For the last 120,000 years we've been on this planet, it's been a really hard place to live. And so 4,000 years ago, what happened was, somebody and a whole bunch of people figured out that it's a lot easier to sit in one place and grow a bunch of food, wait for it to grow, and then eat it. And that sedentary, simple world that most of the human population, and most of the stats are somewhere between 12% and 10%, really have not adapted to that world, meaning that, we're hunters. And in the intervening 5, 8, 10 years since, this initial kind of research came out, the functional MRI and then the genetics under it just give incredible support. That about 10% of the population really do have a different brain structure, different genetic underpinning, different reward system, and different personality type that are adapted to a just basically scarier world. And now, in the last 3 years, they're watching how genetics are actually turned on and off and epigenetically based on trauma. So you have a transgenerational transmission of this personality type. And it makes sense that, it's hard to argue that if your mother's mother's mother had a really hard pregnancy and you were born into, a terrible circumstance, that your genetics would adapt, or at least some of the offspring would adapt and then be carried on. And, the research coming out of the Holocaust survivors is incredible. You have, 80, 90% likelihood that you can, just from blood samples alone, predict whose grandparents were in the Holocaust, which is incredible. And so, we're just a bunch of animals, and this ability for us to adapt into a world that is not really going to change that much based on our genetics. Our transportation device for most of our existence were just feet. So we walk, and so maybe 100 miles from where you were born, you might wind up in a somewhat different environment for most of our existence. But now it's we're able to completely change our worlds almost overnight. And so the monkey and the elephant, the elephant is having a hell of a hard time adapting to how different our worlds can be almost overnight, from the neocortex perspective. So you see this personality, and it's incredibly resilient genetics. They just seem to keep cropping up and waiting for the next ice age to hit, or, the next disaster. And, 10% of the populations are the ones that are the problem solvers and the chronically discontent, always waiting for the next shoe to drop, because it might, where, farmers need to be able to tolerate a very simple, sedentary, boring world. And we don't. Navy SEALs and entrepreneurs, the clients that I have been working with almost exclusively, we just don't adapt.
It's just amazing to me that entrepreneurs are like an evolutionary adaptation and sort of the way you're saying it. And one of the things that I remember being a big discussion when I was at Wharton, which was 15 years ago, was it was always a debate about whether or not entrepreneurship could be taught or whether you were born with it. And from what you're saying, it sounds to me pretty much like you're predestined to be an entrepreneur or not.
Well, it as Gary Vee says, you know, 20 years ago, somebody says you're an entrepreneur, it basically means you're unemployed. And it's a different brain structure. That's the easiest way to say it. The hunter's brain or the entrepreneurial mind. We are occipitally dominant, meaning that we're visually dominant. And you put us in a functional MRI, the back of our heads light up when we are asked to, see stimuli. But for the driven brain or this hunter's brain, what happens is the occipital lobe is dominant, but the frontal lobe is not dominant, is hypoactive or underactive. And that's the defining feature of attention deficit disorder, ADD and ADHD. But what that does is allows the frontal brain to carry 7, 10, 12 different thoughts at the same time. So the entrepreneurial mind is we're multi-thinkers. And we need to see the big picture, and once we see the big picture, then we can draw these unique kind of creative ways to solve problems. And so, not that that combined with the inability, it's like I always laugh about. I'm basically unemployable. You look at my resume, and it's or most 99% of my clients' resumes, every 18 months or so, they're on to a new venture. They're on to something new. And we're very, very independent people, and so I really can't have a boss, because a boss tells me how to do something. My mind and my frontal lobe immediately starts to think about a better way to solve that problem. And if I'm forced to do it their way, I'll roll my eyes and seem condescending. It's like, why don't we do it this way? And so it's a personality mismatch for a boss that's telling you how to grow field, how to plant the field, where immediately we are coming up with a better way to do it.
Yeah. So when I was 18, I think, so it was my first year of college, I got an internship that summer with Freddie Mac, which it's about as corporate as it gets, right? Or as corporate / governmental as it gets. Completely opposite of anything that I could possibly see myself doing. But I was working in real estate, or I was studying real estate, and I got this internship. And I show up the first day, and I meet my 6 bosses. They tell me that the next day they're all going to a conference for the next week or something. Oh no, it was like a week. And all of them gave me assignments to work on while they were gone. And I finished everything by the end of the first day. And so the rest of the week was just sort of messing around, doing nothing and not learning and then a week later I basically made up an excuse and I quit. And I haven't done that, but I've worked for, 12 different companies for various different stints, and until finally accepting that it's just not my thing to be an employee. And it's funny how the symptoms of ADD are I've seen really funny presentations, like Cameron Herold has done this, where he's listed all the symptoms of ADD, and it's like, these are actually the symptoms of entrepreneurs. So how much do you fight it? How much do you hone it and target it? And also, I know I'm rambling here, but the other thing that this keeps making me think of is, and I think I told you this when we were in person, but when I was younger, for a significant portion of my teenage years, I really wanted to end up training to be a Marine sniper, recon sniper. So when I was young, and really young, I think I was probably 9 or 10 when I started target practice. I was a really good shot by the time I was 11 or 12. And it was just something that was really fascinating to me. And I always found it very, if I say meditative now, that's almost like I'm just piggybacking on what you said before, but that's kind of what it felt like in certain situations. And it was always something where I could, do a little bit better. And so I really wanted to do that. And I read all these books about it, and it always made me think, about. I always try to think about what it would be like if I actually was in a situation or in wartime or something where there was a massive amount of stress. And thankfully, I've never been in that situation. But the idea of it never sort of like dissuaded me.
Yeah, it's, and my book is a really exploration of the sense of self and, the constellation of the self. What am I? Um, I am a hunter, and our brain structure and our personality structure and basically a reward deficiency part of the brain. We have a reward deficiency syndrome. We are constantly drawn into circumstances that really capitalize on our brain, on our on the opportunity for dopamine, all of these things, and those kind of circumstances that demand all of our structures to come together at the, kind of the peak performance is what we are designed to be. And the professional golfers, the guys I work with in the PGA Tour, that just can't imagine a different world where they're in a constant state of high risk, and they're in a constant state of peak performance. They're in a constant state of really finding out what is the ultimate kind of experience in building a skill. And that is a perfect opportunity to really hone, as you say, or harness these hunter skills. And the entrepreneurs are the same. It's a multi-thinking, high-risk driven world that we are, where we really shine. But that's mostly our brain structure. And so you want to talk about self-sabotage. These guys, the 20-something, late 20-something, that are making $1 million a year, or $5 million a year off the internet, just absolutely blow up. And coming out of my dissertation, that lottery winners are probably the best example of this. That they find themselves almost overnight in a world that is flush with money, but their reptilian brain or reptilian body is just absolutely unable to feel that sense of safety in it, and that is real. And so what do? They set up a life, very quickly to, that they can't afford to sustain. Where you find, that draw to the military that we have, that creates an external structure. You have basically a command and a set of rules and a external way to really harness what we're lacking on the internal. And I work a lot in the Navy SEAL world that, when these guys get out, their worlds just blow up because they don't have that external structure. So in my book, I, pose that as a way of really harnessing what we are, that you need both. You need to embrace our hunter qualities, but then you must put into place a way of reality checking. What is reality? Reality is outside of our inner world, and that ability to have a routine, that is so appealing to a lot of us in the military. But when we get out and we don't have that, or if we don't have that on our own, we sabotage the hell out of our lives. But if it's imposed too strongly by others, bosses or whatever else, we quit. So it's a very slippery slope when it's, if it's imposed by others, it's no good. But if it's imposed by us and we gently come back to it, it seems to work.
So is that one of the things that you guide people in doing in terms of their own optimized operations, is to be able to have those kinds of structures in place that are congruent with the way that they want to get things done?
Exactly. Yeah. And very simply, you just set a routine, and I start everybody, and I'll come back full circle to your shooting thing, or your interest in shooting. And yes, it's one of the greatest meditation tools I've ever found. But you set a very simple routine, and I get everybody started at 1 minute of meditation in the morning, somewhere between, going to the bathroom, having a cup of coffee, and, before you get started for the day, you put a 1-minute meditation in there. And the most important piece of that is feeling the resistance to doing it. And, oh, it's just a minute, you hear your monkey mind chattering at you. It's just a minute, no big deal, don't need to do it. And the elephant's actually feeling that resistance too. That's the moment that you need to start that meditation practice and building the part of the brain that allows you then to build that routine into everything you do. And, I listened to some of your David Allen podcast, and I'm a big fan of David Allen, but it's very simple to then build a routine around, returning emails or, whatever else you got going on a consistent basis, but then feeling the resistance to doing it, bringing in a mindfulness practice or a meditation practice into that activity too. Your efficiency just goes through the roof. It's crazy how much stuff you can get done. And it's just gently coming back to the routine. But if you don't have any kind of guardrails or idea of what you're supposed to be doing, you have, this wandering kind of attention span that immediately jumps onto the next shiny thing, and we go spinning off into inefficiency.
No, and now, I mean, I'm curious about this with people in Navy SEALs, particularly, I guess, and other special forces. And I may be completely misinterpreting research that I've seen before, but is it a thing that these highly specialized forces, like Navy SEALs, like Delta, like Green Berets, that they experience less incidences of PTSD than, I guess, general infantry or just sort of enlisted people?
Well, it's I'm on the front line of all that research. It is a tough how to define post-traumatic stress versus post-traumatic stress disorder. What is it, a disorder? And I've had, a lot of Navy SEALs and a lot of these high-end guys, it's a career ender. And it's primarily around, the misunderstanding of what it is. Everyone on the planet has post-traumatic stress. And, some people are afraid of dogs, and, why? Because, their early experiences with dogs taught them that dogs were scary. And is it a disorder or not? Well, it's not a disorder if you live in a world with very few dogs in it. If you start dating somebody and they have a dog, it becomes a disorder quick. And so does it really get in the way of your life? But most of the guys where, the rapid return, so you're in a world in Afghanistan or whatever, where you're getting shot at all the time, which is incredibly addictive. It's one of the greatest highs you can have. You come back to this sedentary, boring world, and literally the reptilian body doesn't know how to adjust itself as quickly as it should or could. So what I do is teach guys how to allow that, basically the reptilian body to adjust to reality much quicker. They naturally have to do that, and the training that they go through, it's incredibly self-selective in that even to want to be a Navy SEAL, you have to be pretty willing to be thrown into a bunch of different environments very quickly. And so most of the people that would have post-traumatic stress or don't adjust to that as well, they're going to fall out. And so it's an interesting spin on the research, but these guys are unique in a lot of different ways, and that the ability to adjust to the environments is something that I have adapted from them, learned a ton about, how to do that from them. So something I do incorporate.
And when you're working with entrepreneurs more, are you like, what are you often focusing on? I mean, I know it's got to be different with every kind of person, but I know that with my friends who are founders or entrepreneurs, you see people who are clearly dealing with insecurity issues, and their like self-worth is wrapped up in how much they can sell their company for, and then they just burn and burn and burn the midnight oil until they burn out or they make it. And then you have other ones who are trying to have some sort of impact or something, but there's still something that like pushes there, right? And in me, I always felt like it was a matter of discipline, but I can't stop myself from coming up with new ideas and thoughts all the time. And it's one of the things that I've embraced. It's not meditation. Well, maybe it's meditation, but when I embrace boredom, that's one of the things that I tell people a lot now, is that it's so hard to be bored in the current world because, we always have information available to us and devices and things. There's just always something to sort of stimulate your brain. And if you force boredom, really interesting ideas come out. So it sounds counterintuitive, but a lot of time I have 4 young children, 5, 4, 4, and 1.
Oh
And
boy.
and I'm not ashamed to say this, but a lot of times there's things that you do with children that age that are boring. And it's boring. It's just a limit to how much you can get into pushing a kid on the swing or playing with Legos. Although I happen to like Legos quite a bit, but those are the situations where if I don't have a device near me, which I try not to in those situations, I can usually focus, but like ideas just start coming out and start happening. So I try not to fight that.
Well, it's the two reward centers in the brain that really differentiate the hunter's mind from the farmer's. The dopamine receptor number 2 is the boredom gene, and that genetic. You're sitting there playing patty cake with your kid. And I have 2 girls, and so it's you want to talk about boring. I mean, some of the how much American Girl doll can you do? That ability for I'm not kidding you. It's like, wow.
I get it.
But it's what is boredom? Boredom is this immediate. It's basically your elephant or your reptilian brain lying to you. It's a sensation in the body that there's something missing or wrong, or this kind of very slow to incredibly intolerable buzz that happens in the body in the elephant that is basically a lie. It's telling you that there's something missing or wrong right now. And from the hunter perspective, if we are sitting in a cave and it's we get bored, we are much more likely to go out and hunt for food or feel this need to go survive. Where if the farmer felt that boredom, while they're picking bugs off a ear of corn, they would starve and die. And so boredom is one of the core differences in our personality type. But boredom is a lie. It's a wonderful opportunity to reality check that there is, nothing missing or wrong right now. And you mentioned, that feeling of insecurity and that sense of shame that's so common in entrepreneurs and, believe it or not, Navy SEALs and, basically all high performers. But what happens is that sense of boredom, that there's something missing or wrong, gets folded into your identity. And that was the core of my dissertation. There's something, missing or wrong with me. And, how do I know that's real? Is because I'm always feeling this kind of achy, chronic discontent. And, it's our genetics talking. And so we are, if we're not blown off into our addictions trying to compensate for these feelings, we wind up, accumulating so much of the world's wealth. And, the other gene, that dopamine receptor number 4, it's actually a much more interesting gene because it seems to be so much more subtle, but I call it's the FOMO gene, fear of missing out gene. And so you have this inner feeling that the grass is always greener over the next hill. And from a hunter perspective, if we felt that, right here is fine, we would kill everything here and, starve. And so we're always feeling like the next woolly mammoth is over the next hill, but there's one right here. Yeah, but there might be 5 over the next hill. So we're always, chasing shiny stuff on the horizon. And so it's that feeling gets folded into the identity. And then, there's always something missing or wrong with me, and there always will be. It's, as I say in my book, 25 different times, 25 different ways, better has no finish line. And we feel like, come across the finish line of an Ironman, and it's like, wow, that's an amazing experience. And then, 3 seconds later, I turn around and look at the clock, and immediately my dopamine receptor sites start to fill in the blank saying that, I could have done better. And so it's this, we suffer from a horrible malady of, I'm not good enough, or another way to say that, which is an incredible gift, that better has no finish line. I'm always constantly striving to be better.
Yeah, but isn't that self-sabotage in itself, though, right? Because then you can never be happy.
So that is exactly what I get into in my book, is that, if you're always screwing up, another way of saying that is I can always be better. You can't have sabotage without better. And so you are in a constant state of self-sabotage. Another way of saying that is I'm in a constant state of learning. And it is a mindset shift that is, once you get that, and that's what I'm trying to pitch in my book, is that this is a incredible gift that I have. 2 PhDs, and I'm walking out of my dissertation defense and, they shake my hands and, congratulations, Dr. Brackmann. And, my monkey mind says, haha, they bought it. And it's the core of the imposter syndrome and everything else. But the reality was, it was good enough. It was good enough. I got the freaking thing hanging on my wall. So, and yes, I could have done better, but I didn't need to. It was good enough. And so that logical understanding that I pitch in my book, that A, I'm a monkey or an animal, B, I'm a different kind of animal, I'm a hunter, and I have this weird twist of genetic fate that I feel like I can always be better at something, and I'm, I don't quit. I will die trying. We have incredible resilience. We get over stuff quick. 9,999 different ways to not make a light bulb. Damn it, I'm going to keep trying until I do. But it is a massive gift when I actually start to feel in my body that I am safe and I'm okay. I'm okay, but I can always do better. And those are two different statements. I break that link between them, and that then your efficiency, and you build a routine around your world, and you're always trying to optimize the routine, because I'm always willing to look at how I could have done better at it. God, some of the guys I've worked with just turned into unbelievable superstars because they're not afraid to look at their mistakes, and they're really good at wiring. Our wiring is prone to that. And so but you need the logical understanding to get out of the, haha, they bought it, I'm still not good enough mentality. So as I say in my book, you really do have to kill the self. You have to kill oneself. And then rather than who I am, you become what I am. And what I am is a hunter, and what I am is somebody who's optimizing this routine of my life.
So one of the things that this makes me think of, which I know that you're familiar with the concept, is the idea of non-attachment.
Oh yeah.
So this is something that, I have plenty of I have plenty of issues, and I've been very defensive over certain things before, something I've worked on very hard on, and looking at failure. And I've certainly experienced failure at times in my life. But the idea of non-attachment is something that's always been interesting to me, because it's always been part of me, no matter what it was. If I spent a long time building something, and I was in real estate for a long time, so I've built a lot of things, but even like as a child, like I could just break it when I'm done, or walk away from it. It didn't matter. And even most recently, I spent 2 years building up a company with a partner, and I walked away from it after about 2 months ago. And it's been the most exciting 8 weeks of my life, pretty much. But at the same time, people keep asking me, like, well, you spent all this time, all this, energy building this. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And now I'm doing something else. And I mean that. It's not like an act.
No, it's, and I touched on it in the book, and I pulled so much psychobabble and Buddha babble and biobabble out of that book as I could. But this neuropeptide Y, which is, it's actually one of the things they're starting to use to predict who can make it through the Navy SEALs, BUDS training. And what it does, it allows this hunter brain, and we have massive amounts of it compared to, farmers. It allows the hunter brain to basically say over it, and if you go through my garage and I'm a scuba dive master, I'm my dive masters, and I'm an Ironman triathlete, I'm a, national competition long range shooting, and I've, shot sporting clays, and then I've, got a family, and I've got PhDs, and but every one of those, piles of things, at one point I was just over it. And, I've learned over the years not to throw away my stuff, because eventually, hey, that seems like a good idea again. And I'll get completely obsessed on it again. And so it's part of the hunter personality, or this, way we're wired. And a byproduct of neuropeptide Y is our ability to hyper focus. And that's, what you mentioned about the shooting meditation. And that's what I've integrated, long range shooting and Zazen styles of meditation, is to really hack into this neuropeptide Y, where, you are just here. You're obviously attached to the rifle, and then the rifle, and you can feel that pure attachment just to the target. And your focus becomes so incredibly narrow, and it's, flow state, one of the things I posed on in the book is that, the hunter brain and the hunter personality is really designed for flow, to become in this incredibly minimally attached, but hyperly attached to just one thing. And it seems like the rest of the world falls away, and it does, but I am here, and I am attached to the gun, and the gun is going to be attached to that target. And it's a very blissful state. And the monkey mind and the elephant body fall away, that split that's between them, and consciousness falls into it. And being able to hack into that and then move back out of that state and then fall back into it is one of the things I'm really into as of the, kind of my last 2-year obsession, is really training people to do this. Because then you build a routine around what you're going to hyper focus on, and then come out of that state and then fall back in, and come out of that state and fall back in. And you can go through, 200 emails or 300 emails after you've been gone for a week. Almost, I mean, it's just, you wind up just ripping and tearing through them efficiently and effectively, but you're not attached to anything else in the world. You're just attached to that one thing. And it's a gift that we have, and also a curse, because if you get hyper focused on, scuba diving when you got a wife and kids, man, they get upset. So, as I say in the book, balance is bullshit. But that ability for us to know that I'm out of balance because I've been hyper focused on something else allows me to move into these other areas of my life. And I use the friends, family, fitness, finance, fun, the F's category, which has been around for forever, as a way of just reality checking, where is my focus, and where am I hyper focused, over focused, and where am I under focused? And that ability to move through those states and really create the life that I want is our gift, if we're not fighting that, constant state of boredom that we're in.
So Doug, I wish I could talk to you about this for about 4 more hours, but I want to be respectful of your time. And so at this point, I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to share all this with us. And where can people find out more about you?
I've got one place, and it's Dr. Doug Brackmann. So I got one website, and that's it.
Perfect.
I'm all there.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome, Ari. This has been fun.
Thank you for joining us today on the Less Doing podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your friends. For more information about Ari and his groundbreaking methods, please visit us online at lessdoing.com and on social media at Ari Meisel. We'll see you next week.